Vika had never believed in the supernatural. For her, the world was clear and logical, but one ordinary evening changed everything. She came home after work, threw her bag on the couch, and headed to the mailbox to check the mail. It was mostly advertising brochures and bills, but among them was a strange letter. It was sealed in an old envelope, darkened by time. There was no sender's address on the envelope, only her name and address, written in ink pen in neat but old-fashioned handwriting. Vika went back to the apartment and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in the same handwriting. The words scrawled on the yellow paper made her go cold. Dear Vika, I know you don't remember me, but I remember you. You promised to come back, but you never did. I'm still waiting for you at the same place. Your friend, Sergei. The name Sergei seemed familiar to her, but there was no way she could remember where from. Vika put the letter aside and tried to concentrate on dinner, but thoughts of the message kept her busy. She remembered that as a child she had a friend with that name, but he had died many years ago when she was about 10 years old. Sergei had been her neighbor. They often played together in an old playground near an abandoned house until one day he went missing. Later his body was found in the river, not far from that playground. Then Vika was too young to understand the tragedy of the situation, but now the memories came over her with renewed vigor. That night Vika had a dream. She was a child again, playing with Sergei on that very playground. He was laughing, but his face looked unusually pale. You didn't come, he said in the dream, looking at her reproachfully. I was waiting for you. Vika woke up in a cold sweat. Her heart was pounding frantically, and on the table beside the bed was a letter, although she had left it in the other room. The next day Vika decided to go back to that very playground. It had been abandoned long ago, and it was overgrown with bushes and grass, but the place was still familiar. Near the old swing where she and Sergei played, she saw something strange. There was another note lying there, neatly folded and pinned to a tree. She unfolded it and read, You have not forgotten me. I know now that you will come. Wait. Vika turned around, feeling someone's eyes on her, but there was no one around. Only silence, broken by the rustle of leaves, surrounded her. She hurried away, but when she returned home, she found another oddity. On her desk lay a small, old photograph. It showed her and Sergei sitting on that very swing, but the photo looked strange. Vika had never seen it before. On the back it said, We're still here. Vika sat at the table, looking at an old photograph. Her hands were trembling. It looked real, but she couldn't remember anyone taking a picture like that when she was a child. It's just a prank, she muttered, trying to convince herself, but her heart was saying otherwise. Her phone suddenly vibrated. It was a notification of a new email. Opening the app, she saw that the message came from an address that didn't exist. Sergei_1989 at. Are you? The subject of the email was simple. Why aren't you coming over? Vika couldn't take the unknown any longer. She turned to her parents, hoping they could explain what was going on. Do you remember Sergei? She asked. My childhood friend? Mom and Dad were silent, looking at each other. Of course we do, Mom finally answered. It was such a grief when he died. But why are you suddenly asking? Vika showed the letter and the photograph. The parents turned pale. This can't be, whispered the father. Sergei, he's dead. It's a bad joke. But Vika felt that it was not a prank. She decided to go back to the old playground to see what was going on. The next evening she came to the abandoned playground again. Dusk was thickening and the place seemed even more gloomy. Near the swing lay a new note. You're almost here. I knew you wouldn't forget. Vika felt a slight chill, as if someone was standing nearby. She turned around, but saw no one. However, when she looked at the swing, she saw that it was swinging slowly, even though there was no wind. Suddenly, a quiet voice sounded behind her. You came. She turned around and froze. Sergei was standing in front of her, but he looked different than she remembered him. His skin was pale, almost transparent, and his eyes were deep and sad. Sergei, Vika whispered. You haven't forgotten me, he said, smiling, but I can't leave. Sergei told her that his soul remained attached to this place, because on the day of his death he was waiting for her. They agreed to meet at the site, but Vika never showed up. I waited until it was too late, he said, and then, it was over. Tears came to Vika's eyes. She realized that her childish neglect had caused his tragedy. She tried to apologize, but Sergei only shook his head. You have to help me. I want peace. How? She asked. Sergei pointed to an old oak tree that stood at the edge of the platform. There lies something there that will bind us together. Find it. Vika found an old tin box under the tree. Inside were children's drawings that she and Sergei had done together, and a letter written in his hand. In it he wrote about how he had waited for her that day. Tears ran down her cheeks as she read it. If you find this letter, it means you came after all. Thank you for remembering. At that moment, Sergei slowly disappeared, and a slight smile appeared on his face. Goodbye, Vika, he whispered, before vanishing into thin air. The grounds became quiet again. Vika felt the pressure she had unconsciously felt all this time disappear. She knew that Sergei had finally found peace. But as she walked away, she noticed something strange. On the ground, near the swing, lay another letter. On it was written, "I will always remember." After Sergei disappeared, Vika decided that the story was over. She returned home with a box of children's drawings and the letter. However, the last note found on the playground kept her on her toes. "I will always remember." Those words seemed to linger in her mind, causing a slight uneasiness. That night, as Vika fell asleep, she was awakened by a phone call. She looked at her watch, 2:13. Who could be calling at this hour? The screen showed an unknown number. Vika hesitated, but decided to answer it. "Hello?" she said. There was silence on the other end, but then there was a whisper. "You haven't forgotten me." Vika immediately recognized Sergei's voice. "But how?" Her voice trembled. "You found peace." "I will always remember," repeated the voice before the call cut off. The next morning, Vika found the drawings from the box lying on her desk. Even though she remembered exactly that she had put them away in the closet, one of the drawings looked different. It had previously had the treehouse drawn on it, but now a figure had been added. It was a little boy with empty eyes, standing under the tree. Vika tried to convince herself that she had just imagined it, but the strange things continued. The lights in the apartment began to flicker, rustling even when there was no one in the room. One day she noticed that the window was ajar, though she always closed it. On the windowsill was a scrap of paper with another note on it. "I'm waiting for you where it all began." Vika set off again toward the old playground. Her heart clenched with fear, but she felt she had to figure it out to the end. Everything on the playground looked the same as before, but there was fresh earth lying next to the oak tree, as if someone had recently dug. She moved closer and saw the edge of a metal box sticking out. Vika carefully pulled it out. The box looked brand new, though the earth around it was damp and smelled fresh. Inside she found another letter. "You helped me, but I can't go alone. You promised to be with me always." The words penetrated to the bone. Vika felt the ground beneath her feet shake slightly. She looked back and saw a figure begin to emerge from the shadow of the oak tree. It was Sergei, but he looked different now. His eyes were empty, his skin gray, and his smile sinister. "You promised not to leave me," he said, "but you left then, just as you do now. Now you will stay." "I tried to help you," Vika shrieked. "You said you had found peace." "This is not the end," whispered Sergei. "This is only the beginning." The shadow began to approach. The air became cold. Vika felt as if her feet were stuck to the ground. She remembered the words of her grandmother, who had once told her that souls trapped between worlds could be released only through forgiveness. "I forgive you, Sergei," Vika shouted, barely containing her fear, "and I forgive myself for not coming then." The shadow stopped. Sergei's eyes filled with light, and his figure began to melt like a fog. "Thank you," he said quietly. When Sergei disappeared, the playground fell into silence again. Vika felt the air around her become lighter. She buried the metal box under the oak tree, leaving the past where it belonged. She never received any more letters, but sometimes, when she passed the old swing set, she thought she heard a quiet laugh and saw the swing set swaying slightly in the wind. A few weeks passed after Vika buried the box and, as she thought, finally let Sergei go. Life gradually returned to normal, and the nightmares stopped. But one day, coming home late at night, she noticed a small package on the doorstep of her apartment. It was an old envelope, almost identical to the first letter. Vicky's heart clenched. She slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a note, written in that same familiar handwriting. "Do you think this is the end? Come to the oak tree, and you will know the truth." For a moment, Vika felt her legs refuse to move. Why wasn't this over? She had done everything Sergei had asked. Instead of fear, she felt determination. This time she wanted to find out once and for all what was going on. The grounds looked the same as before. The oak tree stood motionless, its bare branches creaking in the wind. Approaching the spot where she had buried the box, Vika froze. The ground had been dug up. The box was gone. In its place lay a new note. You found me, but you didn't find her. She's here too. Vika remembered what Sergei had said about his loneliness. But who was she? Vika tried to gather memories of when they were children. Sergei had a sister, a couple years younger. She remembered the three of them playing. But then the girl had suddenly disappeared. Her parents said Sergei's family had moved away, but that seemed suspicious. She looked around the playground again and noticed a strange silhouette in the distance. It was a little girl with long dark hair. She stood back, not moving. "Who are you?" shouted Vika, but the girl was silent. Vika slowly walked closer. The girl turned around, and Vika froze. Her eyes were as empty as Sergei's. "You found him, but you forgot about me," the girl said. The girl told that she was tied to this place even before Sergei's death. She had died first, drowning in the river near the site when Vika and Sergei had left her alone for a while. "You forgot me," the girl continued. "Always forgot, even now." Vika felt the guilt overwhelm her that she had tried to ignore for so long. "What do you want me to do?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Find me, where the water carried my body away," the girl replied before disappearing into the mist. Vika went to the river where she said Sergei's sister had drowned. In the water, she noticed something shiny. It was a small toy rubber duck, which the girl carried with her as a child. When Vika picked up the toy, she thought she heard laughter, but it was quickly silenced. The water became still for a moment, and then a voice resounded in the air. "Thank you." Vika felt the cold that had surrounded her for the past few days disappear. When she returned home, she found that all of Sergei's letters and photos had disappeared, as if they had never existed. Silence, for the first time in a long time, filled her apartment. But as she passed by the river a few days later, she noticed a rubber duck bobbing on the surface of the water, as if someone had left it there on purpose. She knew it was a sign. Now Sergei and his sister were finally at peace. Vika was sure that she had helped Sergei and his sister find peace, but in the back of her mind she was still tormented by the thought that the story wasn't over. A strange feeling, as if someone was watching her, wouldn't let her go. One cold evening Vika found a new envelope at the door. This time it looked very different, black, with gold embossing and no return address. Her heart clenched as she opened it. "You set us free, but not all of us. Where the forest begins, another story lies. Are you ready to know the truth?" She didn't know how to respond. Her thoughts wavered between fear and a desire to know what else lay behind these mysteries. The next day, Vika went to the place mentioned in the letter. It was an old path leading deep into the dense forest, where she and Sergei and his sister never played. Their parents had always forbidden them to go there, calling it a place of trouble. There was an ominous silence on the path. The leaves didn't move, and the tree branches looked like outstretched arms trying to hold onto something. Soon she came across a small wooden cross embedded in the ground. Next to it lay another note. "This is where it all began. Find it and you'll understand." Vika started digging under the cross. Deep underground, she found an old metal box. Inside were children's toys, faded photographs, and a diary, its pages written in large childish letters. She opened the diary and began to read. The pages described events that Vika knew nothing about. Sergei told how their parents had quarreled with another family whose children had died in the river years ago. Ever since those souls had been stuck in that place, the forest had become cursed. On the last page were the words, "We weren't supposed to play here. They are watching. They're out to get us." The moment she finished reading, the air around her grew cold. Whispers began to come from all directions. She looked around and saw figures hiding behind the trees. They were barely recognizable, but their eyes glowed with a bright white light. "Why have you come?" a voice rang out. Vika felt herself losing strength, but gathered her will and said, "I am here to put an end to it." The figures stopped. Their outlines began to tremble. She took out the box of toys and pictures and put it back in the ground. "You are no longer alone," she whispered. "I remember you." The whispering died down, and the figures vanished into thin air. The forest grew lighter, and the feeling of heaviness she had felt was gone. Back home, Vika found that her apartment no longer held any traces of past events. All the letters, photos, and things related to Sergei had disappeared.